Welcome to the Scoop NANP's monthly webinar educational series. I am your host, Andrea Granson, and these webinars are recorded. Please feel free to save your questions. We will get to them at the end of the presentation. Okay, so today's presentation is with Dr. Jesse Armin, whose passion is putting together the healthcare puzzle. He specializes in diagnosing and treating complex multifactorial illnesses with a concentration in neuropsychiatric expressions, stroke autism, and chronic illness. Dr. Armin is one of the few healthcare practitioners worldwide specializing in correlating the genetic data with neuroendoimmunology, acquired mitochondrial dysfunction, and cell wall integrity to identify hidden imbalances. He develops individual treatment plans specific to the history and physiology of the individual patient. Dr. Armin lectures practitioners in the USA, the UK, and Australia, as well as treating patients worldwide. He constantly researches about the latest findings in genetics and functional medicine. Welcome, Dr. Armin, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation.
Well, thank you for having me, and please call me what everybody else calls me, Dr. Jess. Don't ask me how that started, but it started a lot of years ago, and I got sick of correcting people, so guess what?
Okay. All right, we'll take that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm very, very honored to be lecturing the NANP again. Today, we're going to go over mood disorders and neurotransmitter balance. My intention today is to give you a good overview of how a neurotransmitter imbalances occur, what causes them, and give you some hints on how to correct it. Okay, this is me. In case you don't already know me, I have a few different degrees. I am from Brooklyn, so forget about it. And that's a joke if you're from Brooklyn. Okay, I've got a bunch of little nicknames, some of them not so complimentary, but the two that describe me the best is the neurotransmitter whisperer and the Sherlock Holmes of chronic illness. That's what I'm known for, especially neurotransmitter and its relationship to mood and thought disorders. My passion for mood disorders comes from this. This is my son, Jesse, who's an adult, obviously now. Okay, but when he was about 15, all of a sudden, he had symptoms of severe schizophrenia. He actually had mood disorder and thought disorders, okay, schizoaffective disorder. And being a good dad, I brought him to the psychiatrist, and, because I was afraid, I was terrified. And within a couple of months, this glib, intelligent man who at 10 years old read Dante's Inferno just for fun and could explain it, turned into a non-entity. And I got to tell you, I looked up at God and I said, this disease is screwing with the wrong daddy. I apologize for the poor word. And then I looked into it and realizing that the reason people with mental illness suffer in silence is because healthcare practitioners, not necessarily just us, but overall, look at people with mental illness and basically make them feel terrible, calling them nutters, crazy, bonkers, or whatever. And the real reason for that is because we as practitioners, allopathic, naturopathic, cannot figure out the reason for the mental illness. So what we presume is that, well, this person doesn't want to participate in life. Well, I'm on a campaign to end the stigma because all mental illness, every mental illness you run into is physiologic in origin. Okay, so there's one principle that I like to go over with you real fast, is you can understand physiology right down to the quantum level, but you can only intervene, which I spelled wrong. I don't know where those things came from. Intervene at the global level. People, you'll see this little pearl up on the right-hand side there. Okay, that's something that I really want you to learn. I had a colleague one time that said if I give somebody B6, that B6 is going to go into this pathway and do this and do that. And then I asked her, who made you God? Okay, the best you can do is make good judgments about what that person needs and give the body what it needs to work and get out of its way. Okay, the body is a whole lot smarter than we are. Okay, and will utilize, especially if you give it what it needs, it will utilize it to the body's best benefit. Neurotransmitters. Okay, what are they and how do they affect your mood? I know this is going to be very basic, but I know we got to start somewhere. Okay, neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that are endogenous and they enable neurotransmission. So what happens is a message comes down the axon into the synapse. A signal goes out to release a particular neurotransmitter. That neurotransmitter, which looks like little, I don't know, what are those red circles? Okay, to go to a receptor. Okay, so the message can continue along the postsynaptic neuron. Okay, and then a couple of things happen. Either the neurotransmitter pops off and hangs out with its buddies for a while, or it's broken down by specific enzymes, or it is reabsorbed into the presynaptic neuron, and that's called reuptake. Okay, and we need this. This is necessary for everything we do. And we have basically two classes of neurotransmitters: excitatory neurotransmitters and inhibitory neurotransmitters. The excitatory neurotransmitters are aptly named catecholamines. And I always say to people, if you forget that, just remember the cat on the hot tin roof going, meow, meow, okay? You'll never forget. Okay, those are the excitatories. Now, your excitatory neurotransmitters, and this is not a complete list, consist of names you've heard before: epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, glutamate, and phenylethylamine. Okay, these are the things that keep you awake, give you energy, and allow you to have forebrain arousal. This particular panel, which is part of something called a brain wall, okay, gives you some general ideas of what kind of behaviors you'll see or what kind of symptoms you'll see, let's say when epinephrine is high or low, which kind of makes sense because if you have a lot of adrenaline, you're going to have sleep trouble, anxiety, tremors, so forth, low fatigue, lower focus, and so forth. Same thing with norepinephrine. Okay, dopamine is a funny neurotransmitter. And I mean funny, strange, not funny, haha. Okay, when it's normal, when it's in its normal range, it acts as your neurotransmitter of satiety. So when you do something good and you feel good about yourself, dopamine. You have a nice meal and you go, that's dopamine. I know it's ghrelin going up to the brain and so forth, but the actual feeling of satiety comes from the dopamine. When dopamine goes below its normal range, significantly below, you can have a very deep depression called anhedonia or anhedonia, which is a lack of joy. We also get that with low serotonin. Just remember, all depression is not the same. Here's a little hint for you. If somebody has a depression and you can easily get them out of it, go out to dinner, whatever, they broke up with a boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever, that's usually a lower serotonin. If that depression is so low that the things that made them happy before don't make them happy, hence lack of joy, you're probably dealing with a lower dopamine. On the other end, on the high end, it's kind of in a continuum. Okay, when it goes a little high, you'll start seeing symptoms of paranoia. Okay, and that take the wider definition of paranoia, not necessarily the paranoia where you need the paranoia where you need an aluminum hat, so that the CIA or MI6 is not listening to you. Okay, it's that person who's just kind of on edge and is kind of afraid of everything, and kind of takes these little things that shouldn't make them frightened. It does make them frightened. Okay, it is one of the reasons for Asperger's. It is one of the reasons for pervasive developmental disorder. It is a reason for psychosis and autism. So what you will see is that as dopamine rises, you'll go through the paranoia stage, then into the psychosis, and then into autism. Let me give you an example. There was a company I used to use to test neurotransmitters, and if 190 was the upper level, when I saw 250 to 300, I generally saw paranoia type symptoms. In the 400, 450 range, psychosis type symptoms. And all of my autistic children, and I do mean every single one of them, had dopamines above 600. When dopamine gets that high, we're talking about the frank autistics, the classic autistics, they cannot form thoughts. That's why they look like they don't belong on this earth. Glutamate is a nasty one. Okay, when there is high glutamate, and there's reasons for it, okay, it will give you cell death seizures, especially in high doses. An almost forgotten excitatory neurotransmitter is phenylethylamine, because a low phenylethylamine will give you ADD or a low focus. So sometimes when you have a child or an adult who has difficulty paying attention, there's usually two reasons. One, a low norepinephrine, look at low norepinephrine and low phenylethylamine, or their mind is moving so fast that they have the attention span of a gnat. Two different base reasons giving you the same symptoms, and our job is to not only notice that, but to figure out why it's happening. Very high phenylethylamine will give you that mind running thing, okay? If somebody sits there and says, my mind just won't turn off, consider high phenylethylamine. The inhibitory neurotransmitters, you guys are real familiar with serotonin. The 5-HIA is really a breakdown product of serotonin, and taurine is an inhibitory neuromodulator. But low serotonin is not just depression and anxiety, but insomnia, okay? Because in order to sleep, you need melatonin to get to sleep, but you need serotonin and GABA to stay asleep. There'll be some craving for sugars or carbs, and here's another clinical pearl for you. If a person is craving sugars, that is cakes, cookies, candies, and that kind of stuff, then they're probably feeding candida. If they're looking for carbs, potatoes, chips, depending on what part of the world a chip is, a French fry or a potato chip like we have in the States. Okay, if they're looking for that type of carb, they're usually low in serotonin. There was a book out a while ago called Potatoes for Prozac. And it was shown that if you eat that type of carb, you get a shot of serotonin. Also, you might have unexplained gastrointestinal symptoms because 80% of your serotonin is created in the GI system. And guess what? Okay, sometimes when I'm trying to fix a gut, I may add in 5-hydroxytryptophan because serotonin is the major neurotransmitter of the enteric nervous system. Taurine is very cool and helps you create inhibitory neurotransmitters, but when it's high, it'll give you insomnia, hyperactivity, and so forth. Guess what? If you take Red Bull or Monster drinks, look at the first ingredient, that's taurine. Why is it there? Okay, to be inhibitory? No, not really. They put a ton of taurine in because in large doses, it acts as an antiarrhythmic like lidocaine that we would use in the intensive care unit, okay? And so the other stuff they're doing is giving you other stuff that is going to dysregulate your heart. So they're actually giving you stuff so your heart doesn't get dysregulated. And we allow our kids to drink this. You know, it's kind of funny. When I was a kid, I know a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, okay, I wasn't even allowed to drink coffee. That's for an adult, right? Now we give kids Red Bull as if they needed it, okay, or Monster drinks or whatever. We're allowing a set of children to come up and we are burning out their adrenals. And when I say we, I'm not accusing anybody, it's just something to note. So we know a little about the neurotransmitters, but how do they fit into what goes on in your brain, okay? So if you listen real closely to the next few slides, you're going to realize that the best way to tell what's going on with somebody is by history, because all the testing in the world will not give you as accurate information as the following slides. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Okay, so the prefrontal cortex. Okay, this is from, again, the brain wall, which everybody's going to get. I'll show you the bigger picture in a little while. Okay, it's color-coded. So the prefrontal cortex is kind of where ADD lives. Its function is attention, judgment, impulse control, critical thinking, empathy, emotional awareness, and so forth. And dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine are the neurotransmitters that are primary in this area's function. When it's dysfunctional, you get distractibility, impulsivity, poor judgment, laziness, tardiness, lack of forethought, and everything one calls a teenager. Why? Because the teenager's prefrontal cortex continues to grow until age 25. So they kind of do goofy, stupid things, and they don't even know why, or it sounded good at the time. The anterior cingulate is where OCD and ODD live, oppositional defiance disorder. And this is your area of flexibility. Okay, this is what gives you cognitive flexibility. If it's dysfunctional, stubborn, holding grudges, maybe addictions, PMS, and so forth. So serotonin is the guy that runs this area. Your basal ganglia is where anxiety lives. There's a left and a right side. And the left side is language. So if it's dysfunctional, you're going to get somebody who's verbally anxious. That's yelling. Okay. Homicidal thinking, well, it would be real bad if it was that bad. Okay. On the right side, anxiety gets internalized. Suicidal thinking, self-mutilation, and just simple anxiety. GABA is what controls this area. GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, is the chief inhibitory neurotransmitter in the mammalian central nervous system. By the way, all the references you see that are on the slides, just feel free to look them up. Okay, and this panel I made is that if you have enough GABA, you're going to calm and be able to sleep. And if you don't, anxiety, insomnia, tremors. Now, one of the things that bring up GABA, okay, that we give people is things like alcohol, okay, benzodiazepines, Xanax, and so forth. Difficulty with those is that they attach to the GABA A receptor, and very much like that McDonald's off the highway, okay, they go on and go off real fast, fast on, fast off. So if you have somebody, let's say, who has a normal functioning nervous system and they're having a bad day and somebody cut them off in traffic and their spouse is yelling at them and the kids are acting up, and by the end of the day they said, I've had it, I'm going to have a drink, I'm going to have a glass of wine, and they have a glass of wine, but the GABA gets released and they calm down, they go, okay, that was good, and they go back down to their normal, even level of activation in their brain. On the other hand, when you have somebody who has an excitotoxic brain, somebody has a lot of excitation, giving them, when they use alcohol or benzodiazepines or anything like that, they will get better for a little while. And then once that comes off the receptor, go right back to their excitatory state. Hence the addictive quality. There are other things on the market that mimic GABA and may stimulate the GABA B receptor, so it hangs on a little bit longer. One of them is a phenylated GABA, the product Cavanase. This is a little old. It doesn't exist anymore, but you can get Cavanase, phenylated GABA as Phenibut. And there's a couple of Phenibuts out there that are really good. You'd have to look for the 4-amino-3-phenylbutyric acid. I've used that particular molecule for decades, and it works really, really well. But conversely, the beta-phenyl gamma-aminobutyric, the one that's commonly out there, for some reason does not do very well, and people have a lot of withdrawal problems. Another good way of giving somebody GABA that gets right into the brain would be to use the liposomal GABA with L-theanine that's put out by Quicksilver Scientific. That's a regular GABA that's liposomal, and it will get into the brain in about 5 minutes. And I've seen it sitting in front of me, putting it in somebody's mouth, having them go, thanks. The regular GABAs that are out there, pharma GABA and so forth, the reason they don't seem to work all that well is that they don't cross the blood-brain barrier. And if they do, if you're getting a good response from one of those GABAs, it's proof positive that somebody has a leaky blood-brain barrier. The thalamic limbic system is where depression lives. Okay, this area is your emotional filter. It colors your experiences. It charges your emotions. This is where your libido is, and so forth. Okay, this is when you have dysfunction here, you're going to have depression, sleep problems, decreased sex drive, and all the things that go along with depression. And serotonin is the primary neurotransmitter that is involved in these functions. In the temporal lobe, of course, there's going to be sirens behind me, is the floor of the brain. And I want you to think of the left as the logical side and the right as the artsy side, okay? But when you have left dysfunction, that person is usually aggressive, sensitive to slights, and so forth. They may have auditory processing problem. And if you truly have problems with the right-hand side, you're going to have difficulty with faces, trouble decoding voices. That's nasty. So here's the thing. We've all had the unfortunate experience of dealing with aggressive children or children who were abused, and as they grew up, they became aggressors. They became people who were abusive, and there's a reason for that. If you'll notice the hands there, most parents are right-handed, and believe it or not, when they smack a child quote unquote upside the head, they're hitting the left hand side. And over time, the child develops left temporal lobe dysfunction, leading to aggression, fighting, and so forth. And yes, there are a ton of things you can do for this. Okay, a ton. Right from neurotransmitter imbalancing to, LED red light therapy and so forth. Also in this area is where memory is stored, where bipolar disorder lives, and where you might find psychosis. This is the brain wall. Okay, you're going to get a copy of it. It's a little on the old side, needs a bit of updating. Okay, it was done by my schizophrenic son. This is what he does now, believe it or not. He is a graphic artist. And what we did was take all this information, put it together in a manner where you could say, purple, let's look at prefrontal cortex. Green, let's look at temporal lobe. Yellow, let's look at anterior cingulate. And if you kind of look at the functions and dysfunctions and then listen to your patients, you can have a good idea of where the imbalances are. That was the reason for this. This actually got the name because after I learned this stuff, I'm sitting in my office and I actually drew it on my wall next to me. And I'd be talking to people looking at the wall, until somebody from the Neuroscience Corporation came in and said, "What's that?" And I explained it. He said, "This is it. This is how we can put it together." I'm like, "Huh? Okay, take pictures, enjoy." But this is done by my son, Jesse. What causes neurotransmitters to go off kilter? Stress. Okay. So let's exactly see what happens when you have neurotransmitter imbalance. Well, here's normal. Okay, we're just going to talk about dopamine here. Okay, dopamine is created in the axon by tyrosine, and the dopamine is created, it's put into the vesicles, which are those little storage areas. If it's broken down in the axon, it's broken down by MAO. And when there's a need for dopamine, it'll be put into the synapse. It'll go, like I said before, to the receptor, then pop off and either get broken down by catechol-methyltransferase, or it'll hang out with its buddy or get reabsorbed. Okay, this is called optimal activity. If we saw it on a graph, you'd see the optimal range. You see the neurotransmitter stores are in the optimal range, and the neurotransmitter activities in the optimal range, and all is well. Stressor hits, okay? It increases the demand of neurotransmitters. And again, we're just talking dopamine, but just think about all of them, okay? The stores become depleted. Yes, we're producing it, but the stores become depleted. There's a lot of high activity. So the more activity that there is, the longer that the activity continues, there's going to be a greater demand on the neurotransmitter stores. So this is what that would look like when you encounter a stressor, okay? With a chronic stressor, the neurotransmitters simply aren't made as quickly as the demand requires. So what's going to happen at first is that you're going to have enough in the synapse, but the storage areas are going to be consistently depleting. So this is, you don't even have symptoms at this point, by the way, all right? So now the stores are kind of getting real low, but the neurotransmitter activity is still in the optimal range. This is what's called optimal looking activity. When the neurotransmitter stores become depleted, there's not enough neurotransmitter in the synapse to carry the messages. The low activities give you improper communication, hence, that's where the symptoms occur. And by the way, it's years, notice the timeline, months or years. This is when you get the symptom development. So when someone comes to you with a mood disorder, it isn't recent. Something recent may have, brought it to the forefront. Okay, but if they've been complaining of a chronic mood disorder and nobody else has been helping them and they come to you, I want you to realize that those neurotransmitter vesicles are empty. Okay. What does a medication do? I'm going to go backwards a little bit. All right. To this optimal looking activity. What the medications do, what an SSRI does, SDRI, SNRI, is they are reuptake inhibitors. Part of the neurotransmitters volume in here is based on not only what's being put in and being broken down, but the uptake mechanism, the reuptake mechanism. What the medicines do is interfere with part of that reuptake mechanism, thereby giving you more of the target neurotransmitter in the synaptic cleft, giving you optimal looking activities. And guess what? This can hang out for a long time. Here's the thing, the medicines don't do anything to replenish the neurotransmitters. They don't even think about it. It's like, here, take the medicine, you'll be all right. And of course, when there's not enough neurotransmitters, so the reuptake mechanism gives you enough neurotransmitters, they do something really intelligent. They put you on antipsychotics. So hence, if it isn't for us looking at things from this point of view and saying, hey, we might want to give the body what it needs, okay, so it can produce its own neurotransmitters, okay, people are doomed, and I do mean doomed, to utilizing stronger and stronger medications with more and more side effects. But people, I'm also a registered nurse, okay, as well as an EMT paramedic and a whole mess of other letters and numbers next to my name. I am not anti-medicine. I am anti the stupidity. Okay, I am anti the injudicious use of medicines and the injudicious use of anything when it's done without thought, which means that you're hurting the patient. Okay, neurotransmitters are stored within the vesicles, within the nerve. You need membrane stability, cell membrane stability. Excuse me, I was just drinking water, for all of this to work. And you guys all know that I wrote a book with Elizabeth Lambert in Australia, who I like to call the Great and Powerful. Okay, leaky cells, leaky gut, and leaky brain. And the fact is, if you've got leaky cells, well, and you're going to have a leaky gut, you're going to have a leaky brain, and you're going to have leaky mitochondria. And let's face it, if you remember the electron transport chain and what is necessary to run the fifth complex, which is ATP synthase, the intermembrane space in the mitochondria requires a fair amount of protons that have been thrown in there. And that particular proton gradient actually runs ATP synthase. If you have quote unquote leaky cells, damaged cell membranes, you're going to start losing those high energy protons, and ATP synthase isn't going to work. Hence, you're going to see mitochondrial dysfunction. Stress accelerates the neurotransmitter turnover. I said that already, didn't I? Okay. What stressors can affect that? Well, we talked a little bit about the last time about the cell danger response. Okay, and I would be happy to do an entire lecture on cell danger response if I'm asked. Cell danger response are those things that will injure the cell in equal measure. So we already know about heavy metals and heat, salt, that kind of stuff. We all know about mold, fungi, bacteria, parasites, and please, in your mind, put viruses in there. I forgot. Okay, but all the psychological, emotional, and spiritual things that we face can injure the cell just as much as chronic Lyme disease. Okay, and it doesn't have to be a rape or a battle. It could be an ongoing toxic relationship. It could be a non-nurturing childhood. Okay, there are loads of spiritual things that go intergenerational and stuff that may have a contribution. It's our job, not our patients, it's our job to figure it out. Okay, so when you have a chronic cell danger response, what happens is the cells are unable to reboot their homeostatic or allostatic mechanisms. This is what causes inflammation and results in neurotransmitter imbalance, leaky gut, leaky cell, leaky brain. Sometimes we call it chronic inflammatory response syndrome, okay, which is usually associated with biotoxins. The chronic symptoms will express as mood disorders, immune dysregulation, autoimmune disease, and chronic unremitting illness and disability. It's all in a big circle, and it gets worse and worse and worse unless we intervene. Once you get to the chronic cell danger response stage, the body will simply not heal itself. This is why people with chronic Lyme disease, even being treated for years with antibiotics and rotating antibiotics, okay, still don't get better. And the common wisdom now is that Lyme disease can't be cured. Just ask somebody on the street, and if they know anything about Lyme disease, that's what they're going to tell you. And I would like to say that, I would like to say a bad word, but that's nonsense. The symptoms that you see are influenced by toxins, microbes, diet, everything we talked about. Okay, these are the things that we have control over: lifestyle, nutrients. I'm also an epigenetic expert. If you look me up, you'll see me, talking about the gene polymorphisms and so forth. But I have to tell you that these are not the primary reasons for anything. Okay, they make the probabilities higher, but they're not the causative agents. So you can't treat a gene. Okay, no matter what anybody says, you can't treat a gene. Your polymorphism is going to stay there. Doesn't matter what part of the life you're going to be, polymorphisms will stay there. Okay, what you have to treat is what allows the enzyme that's created to run at its optimum function. Okay, hence working on the environment. And we're going to talk about that right now. So the other concept that I want you to remember is that the neurotransmitters don't hang out by themselves. Okay, they are associated, or they communicate with your endocrine system and your immune system. Why is that? The neurological system put out neurotransmitters, which are their biomarkers, and they have the receptors for that. The endocrine system puts out hormones, and it has receptors for that. The immune system puts out chemokines, cytokines, and so forth, and they have the receptors for that. But these three systems have the receptors for the other guys' systems, so they are constantly in conversation, constantly talking to each other. Hence, if you have leaky gut, you're going to throw the hormones and neurotransmitters off. Okay, it's like having the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, hypothalamic pituitary thyroid, and hypothalamic pituitary gonadal. You get one of those off, the other two are going to suffer. Okay, you have to look at all of these together because they look at each other. So you can't just sit there and say, those hormones, I have a Dutch test that doesn't exist. Those hormones are horrible. Let me treat this over here. Because, otherwise the body's using an awful lot of energy just to try to bring something up. Now, I'm not a proponent of, hormone replacement therapy and so, as a treatment in and of itself, but as stopgap measures to balance the NEI system while you're healing the body and giving it back its ability to heal itself, okay, may be of benefit. By the way, there's two little guys talking in the cans. It's just cute. Okay, mood disorders are an expression of a physiology, people. Okay, mood disorders are not the person, not wanting to participate in life. The mood disorders are physiologic in nature. Are there people out there with Munchausen's or Munchausen's by proxy and so forth? Yeah, but they're exceedingly, and there's an exceeding small number of them. I treat this. I've been in practice 46 years now. Okay, I've seen 2 cases of Munchausen by proxy, 2. Okay, of actual cases like that. Presume physiologic expression. Counsel your patients. Fix them. Prove to them that they can get better, and they will. Okay, so anything can cause anything. So how do we know how to intervene? Well, some of it's always history. Don't forget, in in real estate, it's location. In medicine, it's history. Okay, but we all like to do tests. So what I'm going to tell you is, be careful what tests you order. You may have to interpret them. You can tell a practitioner does not know what they're talking about when they prescribe line by line in a test, instead of looking back at the test and saying, what the heck's going on? Now, how can I best intervene? And I tend to see a lot of people. I mean, my practice is those people who've been here, there, and everywhere and are still ill. And they usually come in with 3 and 4 page treatment plans. And I'm like, how do you possibly do this? It's not And I end up, combining it or just looking at it saying, well, if this is not getting you better, it's easy. You're not absorbing anything. Okay. Wrong way. So let's look at this is my strategy. It's the older strategy, the original one. Okay, this is the catecholamine pathway. And if you'll look at the top where it says phenylalanine, okay, you'll notice to create tyrosine, you need BH4 and iron, tyrosine to L-dopa. L-dopa becomes dopamine, okay, and then dopamine gets broken down by DBH, dopamine beta hydroxylase, to become norepinephrine, then epinephrine, then metanephrine, and so forth. Now, even though I have a yellow COMT and a red MAO, okay, I'm still not crazy. Well, guess what? Some people would argue with that. How do you intervene with these kind of cases? What do you do? Well, something, you can't do anything about the polymorphisms. Okay, what you can do is make sure they have what they need to work. So what's needed here? B6, FAD, B2, NAD, B3, B1, SAMe, magnesium. And no matter where you go in the whole epigenome, you're going to see that these pathways need B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B7, B9, B12, okay, and a smattering of minerals, okay, and sometimes vitamin C and sometimes a few things. But if you get vitamins and minerals into the cells, a lot of things will simply start to work because that's what they don't have. Of particular interest in neurotransmitter work is that they have to have enough iron. Okay, a lot of people don't think about that, but that's what they need. So if you were going to do cofactors and do a kind of a basic program with somebody, you should make sure they have the whole gamut of B vitamins in a hyperabsorbable fashion. Okay, and perhaps a good broad-based mineral supplement that, again, easily gets into the cells. BH4, if you notice that BH4 is necessary in all of the neurotransmitter reactions, tryptophan to 5-HTP, tyrosine, L-dopa, and everywhere. You can't get BH4 as a supplement, but when this reaction occurs, it turns into 4-hydroxy tetrahydrobiopterin, which is BH4. This will go through the pathway that I'm tracing, and this will create BH4 and supply the physiology with that. What will interfere with this? Well, certainly a lack of cofactors, but if you look at the purple lettering, okay, that means what slows down the enzymatic reaction: aluminum, cadmium, mercury, lead, manganese. Another thing you're going to see a lot of places is how heavy metals affect directly the neurotransmitter balance, because they will interfere with the creation of BH4. Okay. Also, if you'll notice tryptophan going to TPH and 5-HTP, what will slow it down is too much tryptophan. That's a feedback mechanism, right? And mold. Mold is a biggie. Here's another little tidbit for you. This goes into the arginine pathway. The arginine pathway is that pathway that takes ammonia and turns it into urea. One of the major reactions here is NOS3. There's NOS1 and 2, and you need BH4, B2, B3, and heme to run this. And you also need citrulline, arginine, and ornithine. Otherwise, what will happen is you may get a backup of ammonia, and this is a good reason for brain fog. If you listen to this later and look at that, it gives you some actionable points, okay? So a lot of us do organic acid testing, and I'm going to point out to you what to look for on organic acid testing to look for neurotransmitter balance. Remember that what you're looking at are metabolites. So when you're measuring HVA and VMA and 5-HIAA, you're not actually measuring dopamine. You're not actually measuring norepinephrine and epinephrine. And the 5-HIAA is probably a better indicator of your serotonin. But again, you're not measuring serotonin. What will affect this? Can you have a high dopamine and a low HVA? Absolutely. Okay. If you look at the rest of the organic acid test, and it'll tell you how much B12 the person has, or B6 and B5. If they have all low B vitamins, even though all these aren't measured, you can presume they're all low. If you don't have the cofactors, what's going to happen is these reactions will occur slowly, and you'll have high dopamine with low HVA. Same thing with the VMA. Well, conversely, if you have a very high HVA, I guarantee you have high dopamine. Okay, because even if you don't have the cofactors and you have a high HVA anyway, okay, that's a high dopamine. That's getting through. Okay, what you don't know is how high the dopamine is. Okay, often you'll see a high HVA with a low VMA, and you're wondering why this person has mood problems. Well, DBH, dopamine beta hydroxylase, is not working very well. Okay, meaning that when they get whatever excitation, stimulation that creates dopamine, it's not breaking down into norepinephrine and epinephrine very well. So the net is a high dopamine, and that causes problems. On to tryptophan and serotonin. We all know we need serotonin. We tend to argue about whether to use tryptophan or 5-hydroxytryptophan. Well, tryptophan is the basis of the creation of serotonin and hopefully melatonin. Okay, but if there's a lot of inflammation in the body, and that's what these orange indicators are, what will happen is this enzyme called IDO will start being upregulated if you have increased lipopolysaccharide stress, pro-inflammatory cytokines, and the like. So when it gets upregulated, its substrate is tryptophan. So it steals the tryptophan, and it first creates chirenic acid, which is neuroprotective, but eventually creates quinolinic acid, which is one hell of an excitotoxin. Okay, so you can have inflammation, and one of the reasons for low serotonin would be because the tryptophan is being taken away. The reason that I use 5-HTP when I'm trying to bring up serotonin is because this is kind of a one-way pathway. Okay, so if I'm using 5-HTP, regardless of the inflammation, I'm going to get serotonin. Okay, and if I have enough B5, B6, semi, and so forth, I'll also get my melatonin. So on the organic acid test, you may see a high VMA and a lower, high HVA and a lower VMA, which would indicate that this person's DBH is not working. And guess what? That's one of the reasons for the mood disorder. In the tryptophan metabolites, okay, you're going to see a kind of a lower 5-HIAA, and the chirenic and quinolinic acids, especially the chirenic, is on the high side, which I realize is good because it's neuroprotective, but the next step is going to be quinolinic acid. So at some point, this is going to go way high. Little hint, if you want to bring down dopamine, you need to bring up serotonin. And if you have a situation like this, which is obviously inflammatory, okay, you want to bring up serotonin with 5-HTP. Okay, here's another example where you have low HVA and low VMA. The neurotransmitters really low, or there are a lack of cofactors. Well, if you look at the bottom, even though the B5 is up, the combination, okay, if you look at the tapestry, is that things are low. So I'd be wondering if the person had enough cofactors in order to run the enzymes. Also, I put the mineral metabolism here, which was low also, meaning that they don't have enough minerals. Okay, so those are some of the indicators you can get. I created something called dynamic neurotransmitter assessment. And I'm going to go through it rather quickly because if you look at a neurotransmitter test, the real trick is to be able to determine the direction it's going in. Okay. By the way, urinary neurotransmitter tests are well studied. Okay. The person who puts their nose up in the air and says, that's not central nervous system, I look at them and say, yeah, I know that. Okay. It's central and peripheral. But guess what? You can't measure central nervous system neurotransmitters. Okay. So it's usually a medical doctor, a psychiatrist looking at me. I say, okay, I'm using these things as biomarkers. Tell me what you're using as biomarkers to engage in your nutraceutical or pharmaceutical prescriptions. And they'll look at you, and then they'll be silenced. Then you'll hear crickets. In which case, you can look at them and say, "You're guessing. I'm not. I'm at least getting biomarkers. You're guessing." Okay. We're having a little bit of a time crunch, so I'll let you guys read this on your own. Okay. Guys, always remember that it's a capital mistake to theorize. It's always a capital mistake to theorize before you have data. But what happens that you have to be cognizant of, insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. What does that mean? In today's society, we have a bunch of diagnoses that people have to be pushed into. Okay. Otherwise, no one knows what to do. So your allopathic physician will, I have to identify a diagnosis so I know what to do. So instead of twisting their thinking into what's going on with the patient, they twist the patient to what's going on to the requirements of the diagnosis. We have to take the high road and do the opposite. So my input is it's a grievous error to look at numbers and ignore patterns. Okay. This is the old neurotransmitter test of my actual patients. If you look over here, 20 to 80% is considered normal. When you have an acute inflammatory or immune problem, you tend to see everything up. Okay, it's a global excitation pattern. Over time, what you're going to see is a lessening of the inhibitory neurotransmitters that start working their way down. And then at some point, when you look to the right-hand side here, everything is low, but the excitatory neurotransmitters are higher than the inhibitory. So this person will be wired but tired. So what I did was take my patient studies and put them in a pattern. Initially, on the upper left-hand side, you're going to see global excitation. After about a year, you tend to see this in the norepinephrine, epinephrine, one high, one low. It could be either one, but it's always like that. After a little while, you start losing your serotonin and GABA. And if you'll notice, the norepinephrine and epinephrine are in the same pattern, but one's now below normal, one's within normal. It kind of goes like that. And after a little while, you simply lose your ability to utilize your neurotransmitters. But since in the 15 to 20 year mark, the glutamate's higher, the histamine's higher, that's what you're going to feel. It takes this long, people, to start seeing these kind of symptoms. Although I have to tell you that I'm seeing it in children or kids that shouldn't be. And I'm beginning to realize that leaky gut and stuff starts kind of at birth because of glyphosates and so forth. Okay, we went to the inhibitory neurotransmitters. What can you do? Well, like I said, you can use GABA, which helps a lot if the person has any kind of excitation. Okay, and serotonin. To build that, we use 5-HTP, which I just explained. Okay, the way that I use 5-HTP is I'll start with 50 milligrams a day and then work my way up to 200 milligrams a day. Why? This is not going to make a lot of sense, but I was told by a neuroscientist one time that when the serotonin receptors become atrophied, they're like a flower that's kind of, closed in on itself. And if you try and put too much serotonin at them, the serotonin goes into other receptors and creates other problems. I never saw that in a study. She said she saw it, in labs. So what I did was started with 50 milligrams and worked my way up, weekly, adding it in, and I usually get a pretty good result. If you're trying to create excitatory neurotransmitters, okay, consider using DL-phenylalanine if the problem is mainly focus. Tyrosine is a good call, except it won't build phenylalanine. Tyrosine will build dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and never, and I do mean never, ever, ever, ever use Mucuna purins, L-Dopa, or any Mucuna product. Why? That is a direct precursor to dopamine. And since you're not measuring somebody on a 24-hour basis, you can go from a low dopamine to a high dopamine in the space of days. In other words, you'll take a depressed person and put them into a psychotic break. I've seen it happen. Please don't do it. Good products, Brain Reward from Victory Nutritional International, and True Focus. By now, True Focus costs a grand total of $10. Okay, has everything you need in it, and you can build up the dosages slowly. And that's my lecture. Okay, I'd be happy to take questions. I do mentor healthcare providers. I have a couple of, if you guys wanted to chat, see what I can do to help you with your complex cases. Okay, you'll see the link to have a 15-minute chat with me so I can see what your needs are. And I'm very, very excited about taking any questions you have.
That was fantastic, Dr. Jess, really great. So I have a question here from Christina Vasilek. She says she's had clients become physically dependent upon Cavernous or Phenibut. I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, is she asking, have I had?
Well, she's saying she has. And Christina, by the way, has done a webinar for she's done a Scoop webinar on neurotransmitters. So.
Oh, no, the reason I was asking is I just didn't hear it correctly.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I haven't seen the dependency. I know that the other Phenibut, there was a problem with withdrawal. What I perceive when someone needs the GABA of any form all the time, that's an indicator to me that there has been a stone left unturned.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they're still having the excitation, and or they're not converting glutamate to GABA, which usually requires B6 for glutamate decarboxylase to work. But if it's something where they simply can't get off of it, the first thing I look for is to make sure that, I have gotten all the parameters that will excite the nervous system, because that's the usual culprit. I haven't seen, and I'm not going to disagree with the physician, because, I know that this is a consideration. It doesn't work the same as a benzodiazepine damaging the GABA A receptor, which has been what happens. This is simply giving GABA to the brain. It metabolizes it. So Phenibut metabolizes out in 4 to 6 hours. The spray from Quicksilver Scientific metabolizes in about 4 hours. Okay, and if they're still having symptoms, that's the direction I would go at this time.
Okay, thank you so much. And then you mentioned heavy metal toxicity, of course, which absolutely contributes to neurotransmitter dysfunction. What are your thoughts, though, about B vitamins mobilizing heavy metals?
Well, there's lots of things that can mobilize heavy metals. Okay, number one, remember that the reason the heavy metals are there is because of the cell danger response does not allow you to engage in normal metal homeostasis, because it's built up. The way you can tell the difference, by the way, should you do a heavy metal test, whether it's a hair test or whatever, if you have one thing like mercury that's way off, like boom, everything else is just there, you got to look for sources of mercury. Okay, but if you have kind of this general, add them all up and there's a lot of heavy metals, that's coming from the atmosphere. Okay, and will B vitamins by themselves displace heavy metals? They'll help, but what I have found that displaces heavy metals better is a really good trace mineral compound combined with a good binder. And there's a lot of chelating agents out there. Remember that the Andy Cutler protocol type chelators were not made for chronic heavy metal problems. They were made for acute heavy metal exposure. Okay, so when you do that kind of stuff with a kid, I think myself, you're actually hurting them. That's my personal opinion. Okay, but things like cilantro, parsley, if you're mercury, lead, iron, believe it or not, nanoparticle gold, which is readily available, okay, will bind with that stuff pretty well. Okay, aluminum, it's a matter of taking a lot of silica compounds that will displace it. Aluminum is a very big issue. If you see aluminum and mercury together in concerning brain tissue, that synergizes the damage. B vitamins, always helpful because you need, what do B vitamins do? Do they grab the metals and pull them out? I don't think so, but what they do, is that a good word? What they perform is helping getting the enzymes, the detoxification enzymes, and every enzyme in the body working because, like I said, if you go to the Roche biochemical pathways and you really want to go nuts and study them in detail, you're going to find out that the whole physiology, everything that makes it work, B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, and so forth.
For sure. Yeah, no, that's really good. Great, thank you. And then Laura Seidner has a question which I've seen myself. Have you seen where supplementing the GABA pathway results in a more excitatory response? Example, converting to glutamate.
I'm sorry, it's kind of muffled. I'm
Okay.
having trouble hearing you.
Yeah, all right. So have you seen where supplementing with GABA has resulted in more excitatory response? So it's converting to glutamate. So it's basically making the person feel worse rather than better.
I've seen where GABA makes people feel worse.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily think that it may or may not be creating glutamate itself, because there is a mechanism for it to actually do that. I haven't been able to figure out the actual mechanism of that. Okay. When I can't use any GABA for whatever reason, I support the pathway, like I said, with B6. I start bringing down inflammation. And of course, the way I do it, given the book that I wrote, is I start treating leaky gut rather aggressively. Okay, so I'm going after the reason for continued inflammation. And I will, accelerate my investigation into root causes and how to eradicate them. If I can't fix one thing, I'll fix what I can. So I'll bring serotonin up if I can. I will look at every parameter that helps me bring down inflammation. There's a substance called palmitoethanolamide, PEA. It's not the neurotransmitter, but is excellent in bringing down inflammation. It's incredibly safe.
I use it a lot. Yeah, it's
hey, good, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
I like it. I really do.
Me too. Oh, fantastic. A pleasure as always to have you. I would love to have you back to do the cell danger response. Super important. So that does bring us to a close. Now, you mentioned your mentorship, so I will send a link to the video that you've put there. I'll also be sharing the slides. I want to thank you and everybody for joining us today. Thank you for the questions. So next month's presentation will be Hot Topics in Women's Sexual Health with Dr. Anna Kabeka. So please mark your calendars for Thursday, July 15th. Until then, have a great rest of your day, and thank you, Dr. Jess.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.